Welcome to Equipping Leaders, a podcast where I share and discuss resources, tools, and information to equip leaders to build creative, cohesive teams through culture and leader development. Welcome to the Equipping Leaders podcast. I am your host, Natasha, and today we're going to continue with part 2 of a panel that I moderated on ethical leadership.
He was a very entitled person. I mean, he was effective. I mean, there's no doubt about him. He got some stuff done, but he was also very much about him. But you could hear, I joke about it, but you could literally hear all of the installation public works trucks screeching to a halt the moment it was announced that he was leaving, because they knew they no longer had to work on any of his pet projects that he was trying to get done, right? I mean, it's right. It's like, how many general officers have I seen come through here? Yeah, plenty. You'll be gone in 2 years and I'll still be here, as a GS, whatever. So yeah, you do have some of that. And then they to use up the political term, the swamp of, organizations, people that have just been there forever and they feel that they deserve to make those decisions.
Trust, inherent. You have to have the trust. Without the trust, it's just an uphill climb in the mud. Back on that perception, and then the different, the Compo 2 or 3 coming into an organization for mobilization, and their view of the world was a little different than 30 years of Army values, and this is how we interact with the world and those around us. I had a battalion, and of that 800 soldiers, about 600 of them were guardsmen, and they rotate in every 9 months. And every 9 months, I had to send the sexual harassment, the sharp team, to re-educate them on what right looks like. But in their civilian life, they just sometimes, the norms were different.
And I think that also plays into, there are times where we are just in our social groups, and the things that we say, somebody says something and it's a little bit off, but you're like, it's a social group and you're like, should I confront my friend or whatever? But in those moments, we're creating a social license, and it kind of like, everybody's alluded to along the way here is that it starts somewhere, right? It starts somewhere. And not only if I don't say anything in that moment, am I saying, that society thinks this is okay, and I think this is okay, but also I'm not going to do anything if this, about this.
And Natasha, on that point, right? I mean, I read a beautiful post that somebody put on Facebook this week about Martin Luther King, and observation of Martin Luther King wasn't really worried about the KKK. He wasn't worried about extremism. He was worried about all those apathetic people who would have preferred no conflict to conflict. And so that was MLK's sort of biggest fear, was that there would be just far too, and right, we see that in play here today, right? There's so many apathetic people who are willing to turn a blind eye to something that's going on, so I think if there's something going on that's improper in an organization, to Will Rinehart's point, right, it's right, you've created a new standard. You're apathetic, you're part of the problem, right? You're not part of the solution.
The word that keeps coming up in my brain as we're talking about this is transparency. And that's not only from top down, that's bottom up too. One thing that there's a blessing and a curse with my job, where the entire band is stationed for 20 plus years. So there can be a lot of history with everything. And while we get to know each other very, very well, and we become very, very close, yes, the apathetic nature can come into play. And also there's a lot of collective we-isms that come into play as well. So one thing that I constantly try to remind my team is, if you give me a broad and vague question, I'm going to give you a broad and vague answer back. Or I'm going to give you what's in the Army SOP, because that's the way that you're asking me that question. Do you want me to set a standard that's just going to cover everybody as generally as possible? Or do you have a situation that you need help with? And if so, what do you need from us for you to be successful, or for this to be right for you? That's hard sometimes. That's hard for people to want to be transparent with that information. Or maybe it's, a bunch of years of just hurt and grudge from, being stationed in the same place and working with the same people from year to year to year, that it's hard for them to remove themselves and actually say, oh, well, this is how it's affecting me, and this is what I propose would be a solution that would be helpful. Sometimes it's very hard for people to separate those two things. So that's definitely a challenge in our workplace, making that ethical decision, not only on their side, but then from the leader's side too. That's something that, warrants a lot of discussion.
Also, when you said that transparency piece, not only top down, but also from bottom up, I know some of the situations that I've seen become the most ethical start with my least favorite thing. One of my top 5 least favorite things people say in the Army, let me say it like that. And they're like, let's keep it at the lowest level. And I think that what they think that means is, let's hide it from everybody else above us. What it means is solve it, but other people can know about it. Like, they know that you've solved it. If you have to hide it, you're probably a criminal. I mean, I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but criminals. So does anybody have any final thought for this conversation?
I've got one, because the word trust has come up. We talked leadership, and one of the things that I've really come to realize, and I taught to the instructors when I was at the Cyrus School, was that by and large, leadership and steering, because leadership is influence, right? It's influence, nothing more, nothing less. So whether you're an instructor, you're a commander, you're a director, you're a producer, if you are in charge of somebody, you're going to have to exert some kind of influence over them to lead them. By and large, most people ask themselves 3 questions when they meet somebody new, right? So you walk up, it's like, here we are, the 6 of us, we're somewhere in the back of your subconscious, you're saying, okay, well, here's Shawn. Can I trust this guy? That's the question they ask. Can he help me? And does he care about me? Those 3 questions, genuine, because people are very, we're the lord of our own rings, right? As far as, the ego side of thoughts. So I feel like as a leader, if you can express that, not in saying, yes, you can trust me, and yes, I can help you, right? But through what you demonstrate, the way you say things, the actions you take, right, to Brandie's point, and those standards you set, then people know, yes, I can trust this person, and this person is actually helping me do my thing. And having young soldiers, so many of them came in the Army. When I was still with the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, we were getting these young kids in, and, granddad had been in Vietnam, dad was in Desert Storm, older brother or cousin, somebody was an OIF 1 or 2, and they wanted to come do their thing. They didn't want to be around the guys that were selling drugs in the barracks or all the other shenanigans, that soldiers get into, right? And so when we had troop commanders and first sergeants actually cleaning house and holding people accountable, suddenly these kids just brightened up like you wouldn't believe, because that's what they wanted. They wanted to come do their thing. So I think that's where we got to set that. So those 3 questions, can I trust this person? Can this person help me? And does this person care about me? I think those, if you can answer those through your words and actions, I think that really makes a big difference.
I have one more thing to say. Recently, my eyes have been open to systemic racism in our society. And just this morning, I was watching video after video of Jane Elliott and her famous blue eyes, brown eyes exercise. If you don't know about it, she basically, in 1968, in her classroom, realized after Martin Luther King had been assassinated that there was racism in our society, and then she was teaching about, for example, Columbus versus Native American. She decided that she was going to do this experiment in her classroom where she separated the blue eyes and the brown eyes, and she said that the blue eyes were less intelligent than the brown eyes. And she was able to show these kids how racism can run rampant in our society. So I guess my point is that I feel like it's see something, say something. That once you become aware of an ethical dilemma, something ethical that you did not see before, it is your responsibility as a leader to say something. I'm very proud of Discovery. They're constantly putting out videos to teach us about inclusion and diversity. And I think it's important to educate and to not just live in our own little bubble, but really open your eyes and look around at any kind of injustice that's taking place. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to hire more or get more resumes in from people of color, men and women who haven't necessarily been given the same chances. So that's my little kind of my contribution of trying to change things.
I'm glad you brought up that as the leader, you've got to be aware, because your subordinates, right, the folks that are that you're leading, they're dealing with issues that you may not be aware of because it's not in your bubble, right? That it's not in your everyday. So you've got to be aware, and I think that gets back to just being an effective leader, and being able to take care of people.
Couple points. I think you're absolutely right, Cecile. That is something that in the military, by law, we have to live a certain way, we have to act a certain way, treat each other a certain way. Yet it still exists in the military. This little microcosm of society. We bring people in from all walks of life, and then we basically transform them into this soldier. We teach them a trade, we put them to work, we give them meaningful work, we give them goals and objectives to reach throughout to turn into a career if they choose to do so. Yet we still suffer from the same issues that the society writ large sees. And there's a lot more left and right, a lot more freedom to do wrong in society and get away with it than I would say in the military, because it's such a controlled environment to an extent, but it still exists. We have certainly spent considerable energy recently to develop programs and try to overcome some of this and do our best to root it out. And if I look at the intelligence corps, a meeting with the Army G2, or senior intelligence officer for the Army, one of the questions that was asked her was, in the intelligence community, why are most leaders old white men? She was like, you're absolutely right. We've got to do better. We have to do better. And that just resonates. If I look across I have 17 brigades in my command. If I look across the command teams, there's not that much diversity. It's definitely an issue that the Army, our Army senior leaders are certainly aware. The Chief Staff of the Army, General McConville, he says, hey, people first. That is his motto, people first. And this is part of that. I really appreciate, Natasha, you having me here for this. I'm humbled to be in the presence of all these great minds. I mean, we've got Discovery Channel, definitely one of my favorites. We got Shawn Perry, the Shawn Perry with the beard. I mean, that in itself is worth an autograph. But then Grammy. I mean, I don't know. I've never sat on a Zoom call with a recipient of Grammy Award. So that's awesome. And then I could never say enough about Rob Massey. I mean, just a great American, great human being. And then, of course, our host, she has kept me humble for the last decade and kept me honest and transparent. And so I have folks that work for me that, manage my time and things like that. And I've always been conscious of not asking them to do things that would be considered unethical or create a perception. And so, and that's one of the first things I tell my soldiers that work for me is like, hey, if I ever ask you to do something that you have to pause and think, and I need you to come back to me and say, hey, Sergeant Major, did you just ask me that question? And because maybe I didn't realize it. Help me, you keep me in check and I'll keep you in check. And we'll take care of one another. And as Natasha knows, over the years, I may have been in senior leader roles, but my focus was always on the lowest ranking employee, the lowest ranking soldier in the organization. And as leaders, as senior leaders, and all of us are senior leaders in what we do in our professions, it's never about you. It stopped being about you a long time ago. And it's all about those folks that work for you or around you. And if you ever lose that sight picture, it's time to think about doing something else. Take care of your people and they'll take care of everything else.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, everybody on the panel. We aspire to be what we can see, right? So if there's nobody in our organization that looks like us, chances are nobody's aspiring to be like that person. So the old white men that Will Rinehart talks about, old white men need to mentor our minorities in our organizations. Otherwise, they never get there. And there's far too many people across the military for sure that say, I'm not going to mentor a woman because I'm afraid she's going to charge me with sexual harassment. Well, in that case, you're a coward and you don't belong here. And that's just my 2 cents on that. I think the leader at the end of the day sets the ethical tone for the organization. And if we're not careful, if we're toxic leaders, if we're narcissists, we can put great people in bad situations. If we're overbearing, we can, the classic example, I ask a question of a subordinate and the subordinate doesn't know the answer. If I've got a bad culture, the subordinate's going to make something up. rather than saying, I don't know and I'll get back to you later. And so we need to be very, very careful about putting the subordinates in our organization in those sort of gray areas. We need to create, organizations that are not zero defect organizations. And it starts with the leader, not inadvertently putting their people in these bad positions.
I hope you enjoyed this special series featuring multiple voices and perspectives on ethical leadership. We will return next week with a regular episode of the Equipping Leaders podcast. Thank you for listening to the Equipping Leaders podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at novel_Natasha or on Twitter at Natasha Cheyenne. Please join me next time for more insight and resources to equip leaders.